The factors of 12. 1, 12, 2, 6, 3, and 4. Today's a fairly short lesson because I know it's mostly a review of something you've done before, but it's going to be integral to what we do later on, and that is factoring. Factoring. The big thing that most people don't get about factoring is why it's helpful, and I really can't get into that until we get to something later on, but this is what you just kind of did in your DOM. You factored the last number for me, and that's kind of the first step on most of these problems, is you factor the last number. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. Now we're going to kind of sprint through this first example so that I can backtrack and show you things about it, and we're going to hit the other examples much faster. The whole premise of today is to find two numbers that multiply to give you 12, and add to give you -4. Now, if you're looking at that, you're thinking, Mr. Robert, I'm pretty sure 2 and 6 don't add to get 4. But I'm going to show you ways to know what has to be positive, what has to be negative, and all that stuff. That is the actual factorization of that problem. Excuse me. Sorry, of that problem. Now, if you're like, how in the blazes does this get that? You can always go back and multiply these together to get your originals to check your work. X times x, x times 2, -6 times x, and -6 times 2, which would give you x squared. 2 minus 6 is -4x. Now, you don't even have to do that multiplication today. I'm just going to show you that when you find an answer, you can know if it's right if when you multiply it together, you get back to the original. If you get back to the original, then you did it correctly.
Shouldn't the which quantities in them?
They are. Oh, that's an X. It's an X.
Okay.
So like the 12 is when you read the factoring.
That's right. You'll always factor the last number. Now, where it gets tricky is sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative, sometimes one positive, sometimes one negative. So I'm going to show you kind of a trick to knowing where you're going to have a negative number in a factor and where you're going to have a positive number in a factor. That's probably the hardest part of today, because if I asked you to find two numbers that multiplied to get 12 and added to get 4, if you looked at these, you'd be like, well, those add to 13, 8, and 7. None of them work. But if I teach you how to look and see which ones are going to be negative, then you can go, oh, -6 plus 2, that is -4. So that's the goal for this lesson, to teach you how to factor in an as efficient way as possible. And I know you guys like for me to break things down in steps, so here you go. Step 1 in factoring. I'm going to be adding steps every day, so you might want to keep this in a more central place in your notes. Step 1 was what you did yesterday. Step 1 is factor out anything common. That's what you did yesterday, and I'll show you an example of that. Factor out anything common. What? That's a.
Oh, you marked it well.
If I try to pick it up, I'll turn on something else. Common. Now, again, that's what we did yesterday, stuff like this, and this is a very quick example. What do those two things have in common? They have a 3 and an x. That's the kind of thing we did yesterday, where you just took out the numbers and the letters that they have in common. I'm going to teach you so many different ways to factor, but they all start with that step. Factor out what things have in common. Step 2, which is where we're stopping today. Step 1 we did yesterday, step 2 we're doing today. Step 2, determine whether or not you're dealing with a quadratic. What the heck is a quadratic? Who can tell me what a quadratic is? I heard of 4. What? Because of the quad. You know what's interesting about that? That is an excellent piece of logic, but actually it doesn't. Not, well. Technically, it doesn't have anything to do with 4. A quadratic is like x squared, like the one we just did a second ago, plus x minus 6. Now, maybe quadratic comes from the fact that your top power in a quadratic is always going to be a square, always. And maybe they think square, 4 sides, quadratic, but there's really nothing 4-ish about these. So it is interesting that they chose.
Actually, isn't the answer x dot 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 then x parentheses kind of 4?
You mean 4 things after you factor it?
Yeah.
That could be it. Now, not all of them are just going to be 4, but that could be where it came from. That's an interesting question. I should look that up sometime. So, step 2. Do I have a quadratic? If you do have a quadratic, then you're going to need to factor like I'm going to show you how to do today. And before we go on to a fresh example, I'm going to show you quickly the shortcuts by going back to the last problem. Except there's all this stuff on the board. So never mind. I'm going to go on to another problem. Here we go. Now, 27. Is there anything in common that I can factor out of that, like a 2 or an x? No, not. If I said the second one, I apologize. The top one.
Oh, 1.
Yeah, 1. But if it's ever just 1, then you say nothing. Nothing. Step 2. Do we have a quadratic? Yes, we do. It's a power. It's a power of 2. That is a quadratic. That's an arrow, by the way.
That was a 7.
Yeah, whatever. The further you get to the edges of this board, the more off it gets. So I'm just going to try to stick to the middle. You have a quadratic. Now, here are the tips of the day.
I know what you're about to say.
Oh, really? What am I about to say?
I don't know. But I know how to do it.
Good. Now, you're always going to start with whatever your variable is. All factoring of quadratic will end up like that.
Plus 6 plus 1.
That's very good. That's very good. But before we get to that, I have to show some tips. Because that one was a little more straightforward than the last one. There are 2 things you need to know. Well, technically 4 things. 4, quad, maybe that's it. You need to know what these numbers are, but you also need to know what these signs are. Are these going to be pluses or are they going to be minuses? Here's how you can determine the signs before you ever look at the numbers. First thing you want to look at is the second sign. This one right here. Well, that's pointing to the plus sign. All right, if it's positive, if the second sign is positive, then these 2 signs are going to be the same. Not necessarily both positive, but they're going to be the same sign. If it's positive, they're going to be the same. If they're the same, then this one will tell you what they need to be. Jeez Louise. That first sign will tell you what they need to be. So, they're the same, and they're both positive. If this had been a plus and this had been a minus, then I know they'd both be the same, and they'd both be minus signs. Now, on 27, you have a negative right there, which means when we do that one, they aren't going to be the same. They're going to be different. You're going to have 1 plus and 1 minus. But for our problem, they are the same, and they're both pluses. So if you know they're both pluses, now you can start to factor. So you know you have 1, 6, 2, and 3, right? Those are all the possible combinations. And you know they're both positive, again, forget it, because of that arrow. So you can put pluses in front of these. Do any of these numbers add up across to get 7? Tony? 1 and 6. 1. And you have factored that problem into x plus 1 and x plus 6.
I remember this. It's very easy.
Good. I'm glad you think so.
For right now.
Yes,
I'm not throwing too much more on today. We're just going to focus on all the sign problems and taking stuff out in that first step. Questions about that first example?
No, I didn't have a question. Are you going to throw your curveballs at us?
Not that I haven't already thrown at you.
Okay.
I mean, you know how I'm talking about the signs?
Yeah,
I'm going to
still
show you
like
all
this.
possible combinations of the signs, but that's really it today. Okay, let's look at the next one. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, you may. Let's see. The next one. Step 1. Is there anything in common I can divide out?
3.
Tony, you're all over it today. I can divide out a 3. And when I do that, that's going to be n squared plus 7n minus 8.
That's what we did yesterday.
That's what we did yesterday, yes sir. And what's inside the parentheses is what we're doing today. Now, my second sign, is it positive or negative? That tells me that when I set up my factoring, I'm going to have different signs. If it's negative, your signs are different. Now, let's look at all the factors of 8.
You're gonna have 8 and -1.
Hold on. 8 and 1 and 2 and 4, right? Are those all the factors of 8? Now, I'm going to let you know, because now you're like, well, darn it, how do I know which one's positive, which one's negative? If they're different, then the first sign will tell you which one the bigger number has to be. On 8 and 1, which one's the bigger number? So the 8 would have to be the positive one, and the 1 would have to be the negative one. If it was 4 and 2, the 4 would have to be the positive one, and the 2 would have to be the negative one. That is what these signs will tell you. They're different. The bigger one has to be positive. Now look at them. Which one of these combinations adds to get positive 7? Negative 2 plus 4 or negative 1 plus 8? Which one adds to get 7?
The first one.
The first one. Positive 8, negative 1. Bring down your 3 from before, and now that one is factored as well. 3 times n plus 8 and n minus 1.
So that's the answer.
That's the answer. That's as far as we're going today. If you can read your signs, then factoring really isn't that bad. I think I've set out 2 more examples, and then I'm going to work one of your homework problems with you, straight on your homework, and then I'll give you 2 that you have to do yourself. Are there questions on that slide? No? Okay. All right. Here is 2 more quick examples. Step 1, 22. Does anything come out of there? Like a 3 or a y? Does anything in common? Well, there's not a y on this one. So no, nothing's in common. So now I get straight to the factoring. Y, y. Are my signs going to be the same or different? They're going to be the same. And what are they going to be?
Negative.
That's right. They're both going to be negative. Because they're the same, they're both going to be negative. So I can write down all my factors of 4. 1 and 4, 2 and 2. I know they all have to be negative. Do any of those add up to get negative 5? 1 and 4. Done. Finished, yeah. What was the question? No?
Wait, okay, that's just an example, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not the homework.
No.
Right? So you said that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry about that.
No, you'll know the homework problems because they're written in bright colors.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
How are the ones in the parentheses both the same in the following that were in small and
So whoops.
Well, because when we FOIL this, watch what happens. Y times y. Y times negative 4. Negative 1 times y. Before I go any further, you see how those are going to add to be negative 5y? But then what's negative 1 times negative 4? Positive, that's why. A negative times a negative is a positive. That's how it's going to turn out like that. All right? Okay, let's look at 28, and then we'll do your homework problems. All right. Step 1. Is there anything common on those problems?
No.
No.
Tree.
No.
He was trying to tell you all the answer. The person who said tree. Yes, there is.
Wait, what?
What is in common in those 3? What could I divide out of all 3 of those evenly? 3. 3. I could factor a 3. And very often, that leading coefficient is going to be what you can take out. Very often. I can take a 3 out of that. Very good. Which would leave me with z squared plus 8z. What would that be, 15? All right. I think I have writing done here. Yes, I do.
It's alright. You can see it.
I'll still get rid of it. It doesn't take but a second. Especially if I use the white rectangle of death. Okay. Now.
mouse.
That was my mouse.
Yeah.
How on earth did that happen? All right. Are my signs going to be the same or different?
The same.
The same.
They're going to be positive.
Muy bien. And they're going to be positive. Because
Be 5 and 3 because.
you're exactly right, but hang on one second. They're going to be the same, because that's a plus. And they're going to be positive, because that one's a plus. That's how you know. So plus plus. Let me write down the factors of 15 first. 1 and 15, 3 and 5. I think that's it. They're all going to be positive, so I don't need to put any negatives on there. And Tyler already figured out that which one of these adds to get 8? 3 and 5 does. 3 and 5.
So is the second parentheses, is that 2 or a Z?
There's Z's. I don't put slashes through my Z's. I should. I write them like they write them, without the curves.
So,
No, it's a Z.
so what about the first one? Is that
They're both Z's.
Okay.
They're both Z's. 3 times Z plus 3, and then Z plus 5. Do I need to go back up to the top one?
That these words.
That's exactly what I did.
You're not supposed to be listening. I'm talking to Tyler.
I apologize for eavesdropping. I'm not listening to anyone in particular. Are there any questions?
No, single. Actually,
No questions? For me, anyway? Would somebody like for me to leave this up there for another moment so they can write it down?
What's that?
No? Okay. Today is the 20th. All right, the first one of your homework problems. And I'll work through this one with you, and then the other two you'll have on your own.
This thing going.
Your first homework problem is write cha.
Right shaw.
Cha.
love it.
Here's your first homework problem. Bryson, step one. Can I take anything out of this thing?
Yes.
What can I take out?
5.
I think you're right. Let's take a 5 out. When I divide all 3 pieces by 5, I'll give somebody a moment to get it. If you could tell me what that would be when I took all 3 pieces divided by 5, I'd appreciate it.
X plus 6
squared.
16.
Plus X minus 6 times.
Muy bien.
Nope.
When you divide all 3 pieces by 5, that's the pieces you get. This divided by 5 is x squared. 30 divided by 5 is 6. Negative 80 divided by 5 is negative 16. You're more than welcome to use a calculator for that portion. Now, bring down your 5. Are our signs going to be the same?
They're gonna be different.
It's going to be different. They are going to be different. Which one is the bigger number going to be?
8 the
Negative.
left.
Pause. I mean, is it going to be positive or negative?
Negative.
What?
Negative.
The big number should be positive.
Big number will be positive because that's a plus sign. What? It would be negative if this was a minus sign. But because it's a plus sign, it's going to be positive.
So basically, you just plug in the
If I were to know that, which I don't magically do, I'm going to write out the factors of 1 and 16.
which is big too.
And I know I need to make the bigger one the positive one. This one doesn't even have a bigger one, so I know that one's out. Let's see, the bigger one has to be positive, so negative 1, positive 16, negative 2, positive 8. Bigger number has to be big, the positive one. Which one of those adds to 6? Paris.
2 and 8.
2 and 8. The plus goes with the 8.
Yeah.
The 2 goes with the minus.
There you go. Now what's number 2?
I'm glad you're so anxious.
Because
Work.
Work.
Work. That's the call.
Come on, hurry. Start letting his
Is there questions on this one before I move on? First thing I did was I looked at all the possible factors of 16. Boom, 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 boom. You know the biggest one had to be positive, right? If they're different, if the second one's a minus, the first one will tell you what the bigger number has to be. So the bigger one had to be the positive one. So then when I labeled those, I said which one of those add to get positive 6. Negative 2 and positive 8 give you positive 6. That's how I got it.
Oh, okay.
All right,
That is the homework.
there's the homework.
Wait,
Oh,
what?
there we go.
Awesome, woke up perfect.
What's that like example? What was the homework?
That was the first of your 3 homework problems.
Oh, okay.
You just did one of them.
Okay,
There's the
well,
other 2.
sorry.
I can't write it down.
Yo.
Well, you've been watching it.
These things are important.
My bad.
You're bad with what?
Sleeping, man.
It happens.
Nah, look up. I feel like spit. Yes, tired.
My wife and daughter are droolers. My daughter's a big time drooler.
Probably because she's a baby.
That's what I said she was gay.
Well, maybe. That could be. She saw herself in the mirror yesterday. That was cute.
What was the
I was
reaction?
burping her, and I noticed she got really quiet. And I turned around and she was looking in the mirror. Really funny. Oh!
Yeah, I was thinking it's cute that baby's good when she gets about 3 or 4 months. She'll be able to pick her foot up and put it in her lap.
This is my little brother.
It's
She
cute,
will?
though. She'll be able to pick her foot up and put it in her
Ugh.
lap. It's
I wonder
Gross.
why they can do that today.
the foot.
Why can they do that?
Because the that bottom bone on your spine,
The coccyx?
I don't remember the name of it. Like when they're born until you're like in grade school, it's just cartilage. So it's like a lot more flexible. So
Really?
they can pull their, like,
I did not know that.
My little brother just started sitting up on his own. He was sitting up in the
So that's the bone that determines how flexible you are, and that, like,
well, no, it's like up until they're like 5 or 6, it's cartilage. But when they get to that age, it's completely in the bone. Some people are just flexible enough. I guess.
I'm not. I am not flexible. Oh, I was recording that whole conversation. Someone's going to know a lot about coccyges from watching our video.